Hi everyone. So this is it. You guys have completed the psychiatric pharmacy elective. I just want to thank you guys all for participating and for your flexibility in changing this to the online format. I know it wasn't probably the format that you were hoping for when you took this course, but I think, at least in my opinion, it turned out really well. I think the discussion boards allowed us to have as much interaction as possible without requiring us, to all find a time that we could be available in a quiet space with no distractions or anything. So thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughtful comments and responses to your classmates. Just a couple things, I thought your responses were really fantastic for this last week for your discussion boards. So first, culture and mental health. I want to thank you guys for sharing your own personal experiences with how your life, your family, your work, your personal experiences throughout your life have shaped your opinion about mental health, seeking treatment for mental health. It looks like some of us have very similar experiences, while some might have very different experiences, and I think it's important that we recognize those. So thank you very much for sharing that with everyone. Then the second one was about how can we create an inclusive pharmacy. And while I asked you to focus more on an LGBTQ population, this goes for anyone, any population. So when you have a diverse population, as we do here, you have to be aware of that and kind of how are you making your practice site, how are you acting as a healthcare professional in a way that makes people feel included, makes them trust you and want to come and feel like they're getting support. So you guys had some really good suggestions on how you could kind of create an inclusive pharmacy practice. So for instance, having signage up with a non-discrimination policy, having an ally flag or an ally pin on your lab coat, identifying where weaknesses lie in your practice site where you could do better to be more inclusive and more aware of diversity. Having training in cultural competency. And so this is something that there are lots of programs, even specifically for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians in cultural competency. And this covers not just minority and racial, but also LGBTQ training. So I encourage you, to check out those resources and those continuing education credits. Using gender neutral language, displaying LGBTQ education health materials. I thought that was a really great idea. Or even working with LGBTQ community organizations to kind of say what are some needs of the community and how can I be helpful to that. And I think that's great, forming those partnerships. And the same thing for any minority groups or communities, working with those groups. Educating yourself, staying up to date, recognizing maybe where your own implicit biases might lie. So we all have implicit biases. You guys have talked about this in ethics and probably even in SAS. But we all have implicit biases, and that's okay. That's just part of who we are. But what is going to make a difference is you can't get rid of those necessarily, but you can be made more aware of it and how you can be aware of your own implicit biases and how you treat others and how you act and so forth. The other thing is paperwork, being very inclusive. So preferred names, pronouns, more options for gender identity, for sexual orientation. I think those are all really fantastic suggestions. And I think you guys have some really good ideas. So when you go into practice, think about the practice site that you're at and look for these things. Does this seem like an inclusive site, an inclusive environment? And if not, what could I do or suggest to make it more inclusive? So, as promised, I posted 2 more materials up on our Canvas course site under the last module. And one is LGBTQ health resources or information for patients. So this is a document from the Human Rights Campaign that is meant to give to patients, kind of, this, and it's for patients to understand what their pharmacist can do for them and how they can advocate for them. And then the other one is about creating an inclusive pharmacy. It's a little older. It's from 2016. I couldn't really find anything more, recent or revised, but I think that's probably because what's in there still is applicable today. And so if we were to revise that document, we'd come up with something very similar. So feel free to use those resources. Use anything that you've learned in this course. One thing I hope you got from this is that any of you know how to look up treatment guidelines. You know how to, if I give you a case, you can tell me what the recommendations will be, right? So that wasn't necessarily the purpose of this course. The purpose of this course was to challenge some of your previously held beliefs, or maybe some myths that you might have had about mental health, or some things that you were afraid to discuss about to help normalize mental health. I think one major thing that came up in the cultural discussion board is that, it's not really talked about, or if, it's just that you're lazy if you're depressed, and it's not really a mental health, like that it's like a physical illness. And I think one of the issues with that, and it's, nobody's fault for having those beliefs, but I think it's, with mental health, you can't necessarily see. You can't necessarily see the disability or see the physical impact like you could with a physical condition or disability, right? So it's hard to really understand that it exists when you can't necessarily see it. So keep that in mind when you're treating your patients, when you're talking to people, when you're advocating for yourself, your peers, your family, patients, and so forth. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm always here. You can always email me. This course website will be up for you. And I hope you enjoyed this course as much as I did. I learned a lot from you, and hopefully you learned at least one thing from this course, even if it was that psych pharmacy is not your thing. That's okay. Of course, I'd love for all of you to become psychiatric pharmacists. I think that just based on your responses in the discussion boards, you guys would be fantastic in that field. And so thank you again for giving me the opportunity to share this field with you, and for your participation. I wish you all the best. Take care.